G'day and welcome back to Critical AFL on YouTube for today's review of a pretty up and down but not entirely unexpected performance against the Melbourne Demons at Marvel. For me, it was the impact of a bunch of our younger players and what they did early that made it worth the watch, while at the same time giving away another third quarter blowout really does suck the life out of the footy this year, as I'm sure every West Coast fan is experiencing and probably getting a little bit sick of. Fortunately, as always, the format of this video will give a lot of room to focus on the positives. And for today's review, I'll be covering a brief overview of the match, who our best players were, including the promising performances from a handful of our youngsters, and then finally my key takeaways from the match. So to open the game, Melbourne threw a lot at us early and were particularly damaging with their inside 50 conversions. What was exciting at this point, this is the first quarter, was how well all our younger players were tracking. So Hewitt, Chessar, Hall, Gross and Marich all had a really good start. I think the disposals was between 7 and 10, between that number for all of them for that first quarter before the final siren of that first quarter. It looked like we were somewhere between competitive and a chance all the way through to the halfway mark of the third quarter today before we got done by something that's really crept back into our game again this season, especially the latter part of this season. And that's the third quarter fade out. So Melbourne piled on 10 goals in the third. We did go goal for goal with them for the first half of that quarter, which probably made the rush of goals even worse over that condensed period when they kicked them all late. It might have started with some frustrating umpiring decisions to begin with. I have to say this, every one of those pushing the backs were there that we got done for, but the irony really irritated me because I don't know if other West Coast fans have noticed this, but ever since 2018, it was a home and away game against us. It's really annoyed me that Melbourne get away with those pushes like routinely. Their backline does it. And then somehow we started doing it today and we all got pinned every time. So it seems like the rule has finally probably become what it needed to be, but after a long time of them being the culprits and getting away with it. So that's my little rant for the day, and I'll move on from that one before it's received poorly. Anyway, unfortunately, unlike St Kilda last week, the last quarter wasn't really much of a turnaround for us. And it really looked like we ended up limping our way through to the final siren with 5-2 just in that final quarter as well, after the third quarter beating that we copped. With some really tough opponents over the last 3 rounds of this year, I think it's probably the first time that I've thought this year that we may just need to hang in there before the finish line. I'm sure there'll still be positives to focus on, but it is looking a little bit ominous from here onwards, and there's not much left in the season. We've got a ton of guys out, especially all of our senior stars from the team. So we'll be curious to see what happens over those weeks, but it may not be that positive. Anyway, like I said, the format of this review does lend itself to some positive focus. So let's take a look at our best and promising performances today, because by the time we get through that, I think it'll be easy to see we have a lot of big steps forwards waiting for us over the horizon. By horizon, I mean the off-season. For our best, I had Ryan Marrick at the top of our best today with 29 disposals and a goal early when we were looking dangerous. He's got a really good kick on him, and today he was hitting targets at 79% disposal efficiency, the AFL website said, which I do need to say is extra impressive when you look at the way our field leads up to our defenders exiting D50. It's something I'll probably cover in my key takeaways for today rather than get stuck into it here. The other thing that's been really impressive about Marrick is what a clean one-grab player he is below the knees. It's a really handy trait for someone who plays in deep defence. And aside from his kicking and the 4 intercept possessions that he collected for the day, his composure under pressure in D50 was excellent. Next best for me was probably Tom McCarthy for a lot of the same reasons. His disposal by foot is probably the best in our whole side, and he took advantage of every lead in the field that found even an inch of space by hitting the targets. I'm thinking of one kick in particular, just exiting defensive 50, and it was short of the right wing, where he hit a lead with someone being chased by maybe 2 metres on his opponent, and it also went over the hands of another Melbourne player who'd been positioned in the hole. So it was just one of those, like, he must have been able to land that on a 50-cent coin if he had to at pace. McCarthy's run really stood out really well today as well. I knew he was above average speed when we picked him up, but he burnt off players on a handful of occasions today, right through the middle of the ground at a level that I haven't seen him do before. So he's just adding more and more notches to his belt. He finished with 26 disposals. Admittedly, a few were from kick-ins, but there were also 10 contested possessions amongst those, and he went at 81% disposal efficiency, which is his strength. The next best for me was Elijah Hewitt. After his first half, I was really hoping he'd be our best on ground by the end of the match, but he didn't quite manage the same output during that disastrous third quarter. I think he only had 3 for that quarter. He finished with 23 all up, and more importantly, I've reached the point watching Hewitt where he's one of those guys who can make something work with every touch of the footy he gets, even if it's receiving a ball off the ground while he's basically being in the tackle as he gets it. He always manages to really improve our position with every opportunity he takes. Even though his stats counted just the 3 clearances, I think he broke the game open at least a handful of times from congestion. So they probably weren't all clearances that I saw. And like I always say, he does a heap of great work defensively too, picking up 4 tackles from his 15 pressure acts. Neither of those stats are elite, but I think it's the way he goes about it when you're watching him do it that really impresses. So it passes the eye test for me. Tim Kelly backed up his best game last week with another really strong midfield performance again today. He finished with 25 disposals, 11 contested, and a team high 7 clearances, as well as 5 tackles. So I hope looking at those numbers, nobody has any complaints about the job he's doing now that he's found his form again. To round out my top 5 best players, I think Ruben Jinbi has to be on that list. I do check the stats of these guys after I've made up my mind on who's going to be in our top 5. And for Jinbi, they didn't really stand out in a way that matches what he does. But it's his power and skill that does it, especially in our most vulnerable moments. You know, that last line of defence. He finished with 15 disposals, 10 of those were contested, and he rebounded from defensive 56 times, which is probably the closest stat I could find to support where I'm going with Jinbi's impact. To put it simply, though, he's an elite competitor, and we've been able to rely on him in defence all year on days like today. To my promising performances, I was really excited to see right from the beginning how many guys who are really new to the 23 were able to make an impact. My number 1 today was Campbell Chesser, who probably belongs in our best players in general for the 17 disposals and goal that he had today. I've been saying it in my Waffle reviews all year that his ability to break into space and use that pace of his under pressure is an elite AFL trait. And the targets he was hitting over long distances also had a huge impact per possession as well. I think he took a few bounces today as well. There was one play he was just streaming straight through the middle and he hit a target inside 50 for a goal following that was probably his best moment. He went quiet for about a quarter, somewhere between that midway point of the third quarter to the fourth, but it looked more to do with where he was played and where the ball was rather than anything to do with his form slumping just for a little spell. And he did come back into the game late in the fourth as well, so I think he did find himself back in the right spot. I've been looking forward to him working his way back into the AFL side this year, and I think anyone who follows my Waffle reviews knows that. Just with the hope that he'd get a contract extension beyond the end of this year. And I think after today, just that one game, he may have done enough already to have done that. I also thought Tom Gross looked great early. Again, it looked like he was moved around the field that hurt his ability to keep racking up the touches after that first quarter, which was his best. I know from his Waffle games that it wasn't fitness or form fade outs that would have been the reason. So I think long term, it's going to be really enjoyable seeing him trusted with more time on the ball over 4 quarters. I think a bit like Clay Hall when we first managed to get him in the 23, he got a bit similar treatment and still sort of does. On Clay Hall, similarly, he didn't quite get the big numbers by the end of the game, but he used the ball really well and had an impact with his time in the centre. So that's another guy who probably could almost be moved out of the promising players soon because he's becoming a bit of a staple in the 23. But I was really, really happy with what he did today as well. And that pretty much brings me to my key takeaways. So like I mentioned earlier, my main key takeaway is something that I don't think gets talked about enough, especially among fans, and that is how our field presents to our defenders exiting defensive 50. So the reason I say that is because I know there's a lot of guys who get a bad rap for us kicking turnovers. Sometimes it's fair, sometimes they look like they're getting too cute with the targets they're trying to hit. But when you look at the options they have presenting to them, we're just never really offering the structure for those guys to pick a safer option than sometimes those turnovers that they end up getting done on. What really stood out today was I saw Tom McCarthy lace out 2 absolute pinpoint accurate kicks that were intercepted or spoilt, not because of his kicking skill or even the bad decision making, but because it was the only option that he had presenting. And there wasn't enough space for the guy presenting to get a meter on their opponent, or just it didn't even look like today the supportive running patterns from teammates open holes in the field, which is something that teams actually need to do to create the space for a field pass. Those uncontested possessions, they don't kind of happen unless the other team's gassed without guys moving into a spot, moving out, and then someone else filling that hole. It might be an art form, but it's a fine art that we've been terrible at this year. And I think it's worth pointing out because the blame really shouldn't be falling on our exiting defenders as much as it should on the work that's being put in during the week to give them something to work with. I'm just trying to take the focus off the individual and more on the pattern that the team's really using at the moment, if you get where I went with that. My second key takeaway is worth ending on a more positive note, and it's probably the main message that I've had throughout this review, aside from how we lost, which is that today probably had the most promising performances that we've seen all year. We went in today with one of our younger squads. All the young guys you'd want to see playing got a game. And with that came a degree of inexperience that you could credit for us being overwhelmed in that third quarter. But as fans, we did also get what we've been hoping for, and that is a glimpse at what the next generation of Eagles will look like together. And I thought they looked great. So, yeah, a lot of the names that impressed today are only at the tip of the iceberg for how good they will be. And I'm just really excited to see what the entire squad that we fielded today can do after another pre-season. So on that note, thank you for tuning in as always. I hope you were able to take some of the same positives as me while you're watching the loss unfold. To anybody who is still watching and isn't already a subscriber, hopefully please take a moment to consider subscribing to the channel if you enjoyed this review, as I make these and my waffle videos every week, and then planning to put out a heap of off-season content too to keep everyone excited for 2026. Otherwise, I'll hopefully see you all again for the waffle game review, which is about to start. So cheers until then.